The Spin-off Podcast Network.
Are you making the most of your KiwiSaver investment? Generate is an award-winning KiwiSaver provider with a track record of strong long-term performance. Making a smart decision now could add tens of thousands of dollars by the time you reach retirement. Book a no-obligation chat with a Generate KiwiSaver advisor today at generatekiwisaver.co.nz/get-advice. A copy of the product disclosure statement is available at generatekiwisaver.co.nz. The issuer of the scheme is Generate Investment Management Limited, and of course, past performance does not guarantee future returns.
Host the ultimate backyard barbecue with Whole Foods Market. It's the Hot Grill Summer event through July 16th with sizzling sales on no antibiotics ever boneless beef ribeye steak and beef New York strip steak. Plus, check out sales on sustainable wild-caught Alaska sockeye salmon, organic strawberries, and more. In a hurry? Choose grab-and-go favorites like picnic salads and sushi, plus plenty of cooler-friendly beverages. Make it a hot grill summer at Whole Foods Market.
Before I tragically went bald at the age of 23, I was like a cross between like Legolas and Jason Priestley from 90210.
Oh my God, so hot.
It is one of the worst things that has ever happened to the nation of New Zealand.
Tēnā koutou katoa, welcome to Gone by Lunchtime. I'm Toby Mann. Hi, that's Ben Thomas. Hi, that's Annabelle Mather. Hi. Is this an emergency podcast? I don't know if it's an emergency podcast, a sort of semi-emergency podcast, a post-emergency podcast.
I think the klaxons have sounded. War has been declared. Now we're just digging trenches and getting ready to settle in. For the next 10 months. 10 months of Chris versus Chris.
War. Chris versus Chris. Amazing, Annabelle. You know how there's this ongoing gag about how Chris Hipkins drinks Coke Zero and Christopher Luxon is a Pepsi man, and they've been talking about that. That is literally Winston Peters' jazz standard line going back several hundred years, that the Tweedledum and Tweedledee, it's like choosing between Pepsi and Coke. And it's come true. His prophecy, the great Winston Peters prophecy has come true. We literally now have a Coke versus Pepsi election. You must be excited about that, Annabelle.
Super excited about that.
Hey, it wasn't that long ago, maybe 4 days ago, I think. We're talking now on Monday afternoon. It was Thursday afternoon, pretty much the same time. Have I counted correctly? Friday, Saturday, Sunday. 4 days ago that we were in here talking about the resignation of Jacinda Ardern and, you know, just the sort of potential catastrophe that awaited the Labour Party. And could it have been smoother, cleaner, more disciplined, Annabelle?
Well, can I just say that thank God for my tardiness, because if I hadn't made us postpone that pod, we would have recorded something that would have been completely out of date.
I preferred to let people have the impression that we all just sort of, you know, that
we scrambled.
The bat signal was thrown into the sky. Samuel sent out several armed vehicles to escort us to the studio, but actually just running a bit late.
Yeah. But coming back to your question, no, it's been a remarkable textbook handover, and I guess a tribute to how far Labour has come from the messy years of the early 2010s when it was the revolving door. And even, seeing him get his standing ovation as he walked into the room there, I mean, I think the polls have probably sharpened everyone's minds, and they know that they can't afford to, you know, what's the word I'm looking for?
Depart from the
No, not depart.
sheet.
Devolve.
Divorce.
All of those words into like a messy street fight over. Disembowel's good.
They could. I mean, that's the sort of theatre that we've been used to for a while. What happened really was in some sense, whether or not it was part of the planning or not, it was to the advantage of those seeking a kind of swift handover, a coronation, a win by acclamation, that all the caucus were gathered together in Napier. So you didn't have these crazy phone trees going around or a particular group of people. So those sorts of things couldn't ferment. Maybe they wouldn't have anyway. But Ben, we had I think it was by Friday night that we were being told that by Duncan Webb, the Chief Whip and Returning Officer, that there would be a requirement of 7 nominations to be a candidate. And then I think in one of the advisories it was also suggested that if there were to be only one, then that name would be announced after nominations closed at 9 a.m. on Saturday, at which point it was like, okay, I think it's pretty clear what's going on here. And indeed, at about 9:30 on Saturday morning, one name was delivered, and that was Chris Hipkins. And then later on that day, he rocked up to Parliament, gave a press conference in the forecourt, the first as kind of incoming Prime Minister, I think. And then subsequently, on Sunday, the caucus meeting came together and endorsed Chris Hipkins formally. He emerged to cheers from the caucus room, having arrived there arm in arm with Jacinda Ardern, and quite both beaming and a sort of, a real symbol of kind of a passing of the baton or whatever. And then emerged, and Carmel Sepuloni was. It was clear that Carmel Sepuloni was to be the Deputy Prime Minister, Kelvin Davis to remain as the Deputy Leader of the party. Could they have done it? Could they have choreographed it better, Ben?
No.
Maybe if the singing kiwi fruits were there.
That's a great point.
No, they couldn't have the mournful Japanese wail that was casting a pall over proceedings. They probably had a private ceremony just sort of swaying as she left out the back door.
A giant maudlin kiwi fruit with wraparound shades and a hoodie.
I still tear up
Complete
when
the
I think
circle.
of them. Yeah.
Look, beautifully done. You get the feeling that there may have been a little, there may have been some stirrings, perhaps, in the way that sort of other names came up that maybe people were sort of thinking of chancing their arm. One thing that the highly dysfunctional leadership changes of both Labour and national oppositions over the past 14 years have given rise to is this kind of culture of horse trading, where people will kind of put themselves up as a stalking horse only to withdraw, but sort of in exchange for bolstering their chances for a promotion or something. Doesn't seem to have happened here, so which I think speaks extremely well of their internal discipline. Shows that despite Ardern throwing in the towel or whatever, she obviously still exerts a lot of influence over the caucus, she and Robertson. Very, very tidily handled. So,
especially given that, and we did talk about this a little bit last time, Grant Robertson ruled himself out so quickly. I mean, that I suppose was part of the thinking too. Chris Hipkins revealed today on Toby's show on Today FM that he'd known before Christmas, that he'd been given an indication that there was something she was thinking about. So those parts were sort of presumably reasonably in place. The other thing to say about Grant Robertson is he's staying on as finance minister. He's lost deputy prime minister. It'll be interesting to see. I'm not sure that the Wellington Central selection has been completed yet. I presume he'll still want to do that. But it is someone who'd been looked at for so long as a potential prime minister. He could have been an incredible prime minister. I think he had a lot of the skills. So kind of a word for that in passing. The danger, I guess, now is, and we'll talk a little bit about the tone reset, is that the sort of the pendulum in terms of the assessment of the situation goes from, oh my God, it's disaster, it's going to be hemorrhaging everywhere, to, oh, actually, they're really good and now they could win. I mean, it's probably the truth is somewhere in the middle, isn't it? And, we've had the reset, we've had the quite a clear tonal change, and we'll talk about that in a second, but we haven't had the flesh on the bone. And each decision that is made in terms of a reset, in terms of removing a policy, will have an impact on stakeholders. And then when a poll comes out, if a poll were to come out and Labour were to drop by 5 points, then who knows what a whole bunch of Labour MPs might think about that and what might happen thereafter.
Oh, for sure. I mean, the stability that they obviously had leading into the new leader, that's no guarantee for anything into the future. You could probably expect a little bit of a bump. We always hear about this sort of honeymoon effect.
It's sort of the Australian experience, isn't it?
And I'm not so sure that it happened when Bill English took over from John Key.
Good question.
But look,
Did Collins get a honeymoon?
Opposition leaders always do, always get a little bit of a bump. But with government there is a sort of sense of discontinuity along with kind of rebirth and regeneration. So, hard to tell, but you would think so. A lot of the Labour people, a lot of sort of Labour people that I've spoken to, do feel sort of newly hopeful in a way that they probably didn't even know that they might were Ardern to resign, in the sense that there may have been a sense that they were kind of not so much sleepwalking to defeat as kind of reluctantly trundling on. And now, this changes things up, whether it's a decisive change that, really puts them back in the game, it's at least something different. So,
and the change yesterday, I think you both watched the press conference at the Beehive. I was in the room and it was clear immediately, probably clear even before it began in one sense, that the tone shift was one towards... The word focus was used by Chris Hipkins about 1 million times in different versions. Bread and butter, he said a few times, focusing on the right now, I think. I mean, it's like this is a very clear brass tacks, we're not going to get drawn away onto flights of fancy or... I asked him about the transformational idea, and he said that 5.5 years is a long time, and he's not interested in catchphrases. And it's
was
like
that you? I heard that one. Yeah,
there's eventually got one in terrifying places to be. But the it's not like a repudiation of what came before, but it's a very clear. The moment requires a pragmatism, a prudence. Caution, blah, blah, blah.
Well, he was saying on RNZ this morning, we've had a heavy work program and maybe that's distracted from, we can't do everything at once. Maybe that's distracted from, some of the important issues like dealing with the cost of living crisis. Now, of course, this is in some ways sort of nonsensical, right? Now, you can't sort of imagine that if Grant Robertson is sort of like looking at the financial data coming through and then he says, there's too many distractions, like, get me Willie Jackson on the blower. Willie, stop messing around with the TVNZ RNZ like merger. We need you up here now working on the budget. I mean, that's not exactly going to help things, right?
No, but he prefaced it in the press conference yesterday by saying, I've heard from New Zealanders.
It's about the optics, right? Yeah.
Is that we are distracted and have too, so he's framed it that way.
The way you communicate with voters is saying that the things that they experience as problems, you understand are problems.
Yeah.
And if you're noodling away with Willie Jackson sort of... having his adventures on long-form interview programs, struggling to justify why there is a multi-$100 million revamp of state broadcasting, while you've just sort of walked 20 kilometres trying to find eggs because you can't afford to fill up your car. Then,
whether or not many people actually paid attention to that particular merger thing or not, it was sort of a symptom of a wider problem. And, the words used, the things that matter to New Zealand, it's the same language that Christopher Luxon has used. It's the same language that politicians around the world use ad nauseum. But it is, I guess one thing to say it, and that may have some that has some power. But the next thing is, well, what does it amount to? That's what I mean.
And this is the interesting thing, because once you've sort of started listing these things that are diverting the government and distracting its attention and keeping it from the issues that matter, Number one, TVNZ RNZ merger. Number two, something to do with Three Waters, in the sense that it's pretty difficult to see them repealing the whole thing.
Well, the first and sort of the backbone of the legislation has gone through in the first bill, and so you could probably again do something optically that sort of showed a willingness to pare back.
So do they tweak, or do they pause? Do they whatever?
Yeah.
And then you kind of then you sort of start to hit, kind of.
Thomas Coughlan had a good piece today in the Herald that worked through a few of the other things. I mean, I think one of the things is that in the kind of vacuum since the announcement that things had to be pared back, even before Jacinda Ardern announced that, the things that people were mentioning, merger and income insurance, and that became, by repetition, almost true. And, it may be that Grant Robertson is absolutely wedded to income insurance because he cares about it, and maybe that lives. I don't think anyone is really holding too much of a candle for the merger anymore. What did you make of it all?
I think over the last few days, like most people, when Ardern resigned, most people's reaction is that, well, it's basically all over for Labour, and then reinforced by Robertson's decision not to stand. But, obviously she's had longer to think about this than we've had, and she probably realised, being the astute politician that she is, that actually her going is probably gives Labour a much stronger chance of being elected. I think over the last few days, Hipkins has shown himself to be an excellent communicator, and it's a fine line that he has to balance between not rubbishing Labour's previous agenda and making it look like they had lost their way. So I think by using words like refocused and the times have changed, that's a really smart way of communicating it. I think the difficulty that he's going to have, especially when it comes to issues like Three Waters, which has been really poorly communicated, particularly when it comes to the supposed co-governance, which to my mind is just more like Māori representation than actual co-governance, is that he has to make it more palatable for voters, but at the same time it can't be so watered down so that it makes the Māori caucus look ineffectual or instigates them to rebel against the minimisation of Māori representation in bills like that. In terms of the merger, I think that actually the vast majority of New Zealanders don't really care about the merger. Who cared about the merger was the media, and so the media were constantly reporting on it. If you look at the Herald, I don't think there's been a single positive column on what the potential benefits of the merger could be, and I think people are irritated by that. They don't want to be reading about the merger. They don't want it at the top of the homepage.
Well, to be fair,
time.
one of what happened was that National Party was being challenged for the places that they were going to find the savings required to fund tax cuts, and the merger became top of the list. And it's because they gauged, whether by focus grouping or just by talking to people, that even though it's not this massive amount of money, it was something that worked for them because it seemed like A, an indulgence, B, a distraction, and C, people actually like TVNZ and RNZ. TVNZ and RNZ are the top of all the trust charts, and so that was, I think, a critical part of it being pushed to the foreground.
It's another area where Labour haven't done a very good job of selling the narrative to New Zealanders. If it was about efficiencies, greater collaboration, co-locating, all of those things that would better serve audiences, then I think people wouldn't be as irritated by it as what they are now.
I agree.
It's interesting. My theory of John Key as a leader was that he was not good at inspiring people to do things, but he was very good at reassuring them everything was okay. And Ardern's almost sort of the flip side of that, now that we're sort of taking stock. She was very good at inspiring people to do things, to turn out en masse after Christchurch, to, really come together during COVID. I think, as you said, there was a feeling when, a team of 5 million really meant something. But when you sort of look at it, Labour has lost almost every big issues argument on policy since they've been in government. Couldn't convince people on Three Waters, which is literally about future-proofing towns from having shit
Which some people in National acknowledge that it's a classic National Party reform, that potentially Three Waters have dressed up differently. That's how much it's been messed up.
Yeah, I mean, district health boards, incredibly unpopular, on tax as well. Pretty much everywhere you look, they seem to have lost these arguments politically. And so there is an argument that, Chris Hipkins is a bit more of a scrapper and can get in there and, really kind of fight the corner on it in a way that, Ardern, who was very much about, I think she genuinely believed all the stuff about consensus and bringing people along. But the irony, of course, is that it doesn't bring people along. Generally what you're looking for is not actually buy-in for your policies. You're looking for acquiescence as a government.
Or even indifference.
Or indifference, yeah. John Key's greatest strength is standing up and going, this thing that you're really worried about, it's not a big deal.
At the end of the day.
Has.
At the end of the day.
Never has encouraging kindness provoked more hostility and outrage in our history.
Hey, Annabelle, what about the early start from Chris Hipkins in relation to not just the Māori caucus, but representation of Māori in those top positions, and Te Ao Māori more generally? I mean, Te Pāti Māori, which is obviously a party in opposition, came out hot with a press release saying that they are telling Māori that despite having the largest Māori caucus ever in government, we still are not good enough. That was Robert Waititi. So that, that's obviously not representing the position of the Māori caucus, but there was that. Then there was also the stuff on co-governance, much of which I think is inarguable in terms of people misunderstanding what the idea means. And then also a stumble on the articles of the treaty, which he could have got out of the room before, but said, "Oh yeah, I can answer those," and then got to 2 and then couldn't complete. How do you assess that as a start? Is there work to do there?
I think, there's work to do. You would think that most senior politicians would be able to answer that question, because it's one that journalists like to trolley out from time to time. I don't think it would have a huge impact with the majority of Māori voters, but I do think the issue that the Māori Party raises is one that they will be able to exploit to good effect during the election. The fact that, despite having the biggest Māori caucus of all time, that no one has been considered good enough to be Deputy Prime Minister. And that's going to be a tough one for those Māori MPs, because, they've already lost Waiariki. Deb is looking strong in Te Taihawauru. So there's going to, the Māori caucus are going to have to think about how they counter that narrative. But it's a valid point that they raise, and not to take anything away from Carmel Sepuloni, because this is an incredible moment for the Pacifica community, and hugely symbolic for them, and and all of those things. But I can see how some of the Māori caucus might feel like they've been kind of put at risk as a result. But I'm sure that there's also really strong support for her within the Māori caucus too. It's unfortunate that it's one of those situations where Māori are almost being pitted against Pacifica.
Do you think he didn't know the third article?
Yes, I think he did know the third. In his defense, I've seen that written today. Actually, this is going to play with the idea that that's a kind of 8-dimensional.
In his defence, when you're actually in government, it doesn't mean that you're ignoring the treaty if you don't know the articles, because ministers in government are much more, just like the public service, are much more commonly dealing with the principles of the Treaty of Waitangi or Te Tiriti as sort of outlined in the Lands case in the 80s and then sort of subsequently developed by the courts and the Crown. And, there will be references to sort of parts, things that are mentioned in Te Tiriti, like, kawanatanga and tēnā rangatiratanga, but in terms of the mechanisms of governance, you're usually talking about the principles. And so it is feasible that, just sort of slipped as a
Just for our listeners, Article 3 is where Māori are guaranteed a free copy of Spare and a ticket to the King's coronation.
Host the ultimate backyard barbecue with Whole Foods Market. It's the hot grill summer event through July 16th with sizzling sales on no antibiotics ever boneless beef ribeye steak and beef New York strip steak. Plus, check out sales on sustainable wild-caught Alaska sockeye salmon, organic strawberries, and more. In a hurry? Choose grab-and-go favorites like picnic salads and sushi, plus plenty of cooler-friendly beverages. Make it a hot grill summer at Whole Foods Market.
I'm Toby Manhire, and this is Juggernaut, the story of the fourth Labour government. A podcast in 6 parts.
Doesn't give my opponents much time to run up to an election, does it?
This nation is at risk.
What do you think you're up to now, you perverted little liar?
I could smell the uranium on it as you lean towards the
There's a radical overhaul in the history of New Zealand's administration.
Juggernaut, the story of the fourth Labour government. Made with the support of New Zealand On Air. Listen now on the Spin-Off or wherever you get your podcasts.
This is Climate Adaptation.
We are the Pōtiki of the Taiao.
And the words of those keeping the home fires burning.
It's more than just going along and planting some trees. You got to be able to defend that place to the end of your life.
We have the solutions. We just need to come back to the belief in ourselves as rangatira.
Join me, Nadine Hura, and Ruia Āpirehama, the Kōpapa Korangi Series 2, Ahi Ka. Brought to you by Te Komato Te Tonga, the Deep South Challenge, out now on the Spin-Off Podcast Network or wherever you get your podcasts.
What about Carmel Sepuloni as deputy? That's obviously an important moment for the Pacifica community. She's widely respected and liked within the team. Has some critics on the
daughter
left.
of a freezing worker.
Love that.
And a Labour Party
The
princess.
two of them have a great narrative. That's their other strength as a twosome, I
West
think.
Auckland as well.
Yeah, and I think too the other strength that Hipkins has is because he's worked in Parliament and he has that great understanding of how Wellington works, which is probably why he's been such an effective minister. But coupled with that is really strong support within his electorate, which you don't always see with those kind of ones that come through the offices.
Yeah, I think I saw someone, Sam Sachdeva, maybe observing that he's the second biggest majority of anyone in the Labour Party, the first being Jacinda Ardern. So that's a pretty solid base.
Yeah, and then, Carmel's got a great backstory too, and I think in a cost of living crisis, people like the ideas of leaders who they can relate to, and that's going to be a narrative that Luxon is going to find challenging over the course of the election.
And Kelvin Davis remains deputy leader of the Labour Party. So they do that sort of 3 for 2 thing that they did when Grant Robertson was Deputy Prime Minister. Now maybe they get 4 for 2 because he remains there as Finance Minister. I don't know whether that might be overstating it. Ben, reshuffle is the other thing. Do you have any? I know you wrote a column last week about how much people care about reshuffles.
Yep.
The entire population on the edges of their seats to hear the dynamic, transformational Prime Minister Chris Hipkins announce the reshuffle. How do things turn out? I think that he will be sworn. It goes to Ratina tomorrow, Tuesday. We're talking about Monday afternoon. Then goes to Government House to be sworn in as Prime Minister on Wednesday. Then returns to Parliament to catch up with Cabinet. And I'm not clear really whether we'll, after that, I think there might be a press conference after that. We might get some of the reining in stuff, or maybe we won't.
He's already done a bit of reshuffling. Yeah. He's already divested his portfolios.
Yeah.
Stuart Nash gets police back.
Yeah. Temporarily.
Wow.
Well, he said Grant won't know it yet, but I've made him leader of the House, acting leader of the House. I mean, the other thing, I guess, is what's the symbolic portfolio that he gets? There's in the past, Helen Clark and Jacinda Ardern have both had arts and culture. Jacinda Ardern had child poverty reduction. John Key, tourism. But David Lange had education, right? Like it's not. Chris Chris Hipkins would he retain police just in a kind of, this is the most important thing to hardworking New Zealanders?
No, I don't think so, especially because he can't, this is the Binders Minister for Police. You actually can't get involved in operational matters by law.
That's true.
It's the only point.
It's a good point.
And so you'd be a bit sort of
muzzled
powerless
in terms
to
of
kind of, a bit of a hostage of fortune.
And he definitely won't keep education because that's crazy.
It's a shame that he won't keep police too, because his answers about the ramroads I thought were compelling, and I think his degree was in criminology, wasn't it? So it seems like he's probably
he said sort of
quite well informed.
He said he stumbled into criminology, he said somewhere that he just sort of was doing an extra paper in first year to make up the numbers and ended up sticking it out for criminology. Someone who looks at the stuff a lot said to me yesterday that they'd never seen a more artful reframing of the law and order debate than he delivered in the press conference yesterday.
I thought so too.
But what's your reshuffle astrology, Ben?
It opens it up for more major changes than probably we would have been anticipating otherwise.
Because he vacates half the cabinet positions.
Yeah, that's right. But also because, you have this whole, new broom now becomes part of the narrative, whereas if it was Ardern sort of shuffling people around, there would be a bit more of a sort of panicked look about it. That said, you wouldn't necessarily want to make sort of huge changes. Government still has to run for the next, 8 months at least in a public sense. And, all sorts of little fidgety operational things can bubble up through portfolios and absolutely sink you during an election. It's going back now, showing my age, but 2008, a proposed regulation about shower head size became one of the biggest issues of the 2008 election because it chimed in with themes about nanny state and blah, blah. And so you don't really want to be blooding a lot of, inexperienced people or putting them into new portfolios. So I think it'll probably be pretty limited. But, I have been wrong about most things this year.
But I think probably bringing some new faces in. I mean, he probably wouldn't need to do wholesale demotion just by reorganising things and bringing some new faces.
Barbara Edmund will come in and she'll be commerce.
I mean, Jan Tedeschi is probably a lock. I mean, she's already in cabinet, but she's a lock for education, I would have thought now, that he won't have the portfolio anymore. Maybe Aisha Varel to health and move Andrew Little. Who knows?
I don't think we'll see sort of a wholesale turnover. Poto Williams, David Clark.
Maybe we touched on
will probably be retired.
Maybe an Auckland minister like that. A guy from the
taking a cue from
Simeon Brown, who's now Auckland Issues spokesperson for the opposition. Have an Auckland, Carmel Sepuloni's one of the strings to her bow is that she's an Auckland MP. Given that Chris Hipkins, in case you miss it, is a genuine hut boy. Auckland's important, and among other things, whether or not light rail is one of the issues for the chopping board, I guess we'll find out. What else? How does this make you feel, to wrap things up, I guess, about what do your waters tell you, both of you, about the election that approaches? Chris versus Chris, Pepsi versus Coke. Are you excited? Are you fizzing like a freshly opened cola?
More like a kombucha.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Right.
I think that it's going to shape up to be a much more interesting election now, and I think Labour has a good fighting chance of putting up a more compelling case for re-election than perhaps they did before. And hopefully, as a result of Ardern stepping away because she's become such a lightning rod for vitriol and hatred and all of that sort of stuff, maybe people will start to refocus on the issues again now that, she's not there to polarise people. I'm sure over the next few days, Hipkins and Sepuloni will be, reading up on Agenda 21 and how they implement it.
What their instructions are.
What the instructions are.
Have they been chipped yet?
Their Microsoft vaccinations will be activated so that they can... Yeah.
I wouldn't be surprised too if Ardern leaving helps to draw some support back from ACT and some of those outlier parties back to National, because, you know, in their mind that the enemy has now gone, so they can kind of return to their traditional camp, perhaps.
I, for what it's worth, reckon that because Labour and National are so clearly now going for the same patch, both squarely focused, they're going to stay laser focused over and over again, and we're going to die on the median voter, on middle New Zealand. Not quite the same thing, but, you know,
each of them are headed over the horizon from the opposite direction,
and that will
like a game of chicken, each to collide.
So
at
like
the centre point,
not like a red peak election, but like the laser kiwi election, if we were to have a flag for it.
Well, maybe more the other one. What was that one called? The Lockwood flag election, because that's right, the two Lockwood flags. The Lockwood
the
flag,
blue and black, and the red and
the swing vote.
Black.
But I mean, what it does leave is a whole lot of territory outside that that game of bull rush that you just described for the likes of the Greens, ACT, Anti-Party Māori, and maybe others too. Maybe Mr. Coke and Pepsi, Winston Peters. I don't know, but it's one of the things to note is that in the Australian election, the two main parties have never fared more poorly, I think, and certainly certainly in modern times. And that was a small target. Not wholly analogous, but quite a few similarities in terms of the way the contest played out there.
Well, look, you know, for whatever anyone thinks about Ardern, you know, I mean, I think I tweeted this, and, you know, lots of Ardern supporters retweeted it, but when it's just the news, not sort of.
Can't wait to hear about this tweet.
Well, after we finished the last pod, you know, I went back and I checked my email, and there's, you know, when John Key resigned, I wrote a take for the spin-off, and I wrote a quicker one for stuff that I think I just ripped off my first one, and then when Ardern resigned, you know, my inbox was full of Singapore radio, CNN, you know, like NPR, New York Times, Reuters. You know, the interest in Jacinda was huge because she had real, you know, obviously time and a place in the context, but she had, you know, extraordinary charisma. She had that X factor that people talk about. So is it a Coke versus Pepsi election now? Or is it a kind of Spree versus home brand cola kind of 10 months that we're digging into? You know, I mean, Luxon and Hipkins, both accomplished politicians. Well, you know, Hipkins is an accomplished politician. Luxon is doing well in the polls. He's sort of the upstart. But you would say that in terms of sort of charisma and interest and how compelling figures they kind of cut, you know, perhaps this election we're kind of playing a league down to what we're kind of accustomed to in New Zealand.
Well, we look forward to it. I mean, something will happen, always does. Events, dear boy. Thanks, Samuel, for producing us. Thanks, Spin-Off members, for making it possible for us to gather at short notice to discuss these emergency issues. Thanks, Annabelle. Thanks, Ben. Talk soon.
Do you find it hard staying optimistic with all the financial news in the media? I'm Bernard Hickey, and on my podcast, When the Facts Change, I'm here to help you navigate the ever-changing landscape of economics in Aotearoa. So join the conversation every Friday on When the Facts Change, brought to you by the Spin-Off Podcast Network in partnership with KiwiBet.
Talofa Lover. I'm Madeline Chapman, editor at The Spin-Off. If you have the means, consider supporting our high-quality journalism by becoming a Spin-Off member. Sign up now at thespinoff.co.nz/donate.
The Spin-Off Podcast Network.